Hello, my subscribers and readers, and paid and unpaid, and fellow travelers who have been reading my Substack over the last few months. It's great to see folks continue to come back to read um, stuff that I've been putting up since February, stuff that I've been putting up over the summer, especially in the last month, 5 weeks about Blackness. With again, I'm making an appeal once again to those of you who are free subscribers, to those of you who are thinking about subscribe to, please do. Um, this this is quite a bit of work. This is the level of work that I do for each of the pieces that I put up for Substack under my name, or is equivalent to the same amount of work I actually do when I get paid to do work as a freelancer or as a contributing writer with Al Jazeera. So I'm not saying that you need to pay right this second, but I want you to seriously think about doing so. So that would be great. Even though I'm an anti-capitalist, um, unfortunately, we live in a capitalist system and a Western dominated system, and as such, that means I do need some money from time to time to help keep this going. Otherwise, the ebb of flow of this is going to be in ebbs and flows because I simply have, money creates the time necessary for me to do stuff, and if there's not a lot of it coming in, then I have to basically make time wherever I can, and that gets kind of hard when you're split between your teaching and writing and doing other things in other places. So today, I just want to bring up, or for this week anyway, I just want to bring up, that we just passed the 60th anniversary of the March on Washington for Equality and Jobs and so on. The great march of a quarter of a million, mostly African American, smattering of white and Asian and other folks coming to the fore. Um, Lincoln Memorial on um, August 28th of 1963, so the 60th anniversary of that passed. And just a couple of things I just want to bring up. They're relevant to the things that I've been posting about over the last couple of weeks. And the fact is that, as usual, the media did its thing in interviewing, all the usual suspects, all the folks who either were part of the civil rights movement in some way, shape, or form, people who marched with King or people who didn't march with King but marched in general, right? Or folks who happen to be experts, because so many of the civil rights generation are starting to unfortunately pass away. Um, for better and for worse in terms of, the future of black activism in the U.S. and the possibility of future movements with the same impact, that sort of thing. But the thing that bugs me most about the interviewing process is that you end up hearing the same thing over and over again from, you know, politicians, from professors, from pundits, from poets, from other elites of the political class who aren't politicians. Alliterating a little bit for a reason. They're pontification about the status of things within the U.S. comes to this issue, which is that we've made a lot of progress. We have made an awful lot of progress, but we have a long, long way to go. Well, anybody could say that. Why don't we just do man on the street interviews while we're at it every year, every 5 years around August 28th, and ask people, particularly African Americans, what they think about where we are in terms of race relations or systemic racism or whatever you want to call it, and their answer would be essentially the same, that there's been a lot of progress with. Well, the problem is that most of us who are not part of the black elite, well, the progress seems mostly symbolic and very superficial. So for most of us, is like, what the are you talking about regarding progress over the last 60 years? Great, you've got a job at an elite university. Great, You managed to go all the way to the presidency or the vice presidency or a secretary of something other within the presidential cabinet, or you're a political operative, or you're an entrepreneur that's made millions or maybe even a billion or a couple $1 billion. There are 45, 50 million African American or black folk in the United States. And we're gonna basically say that because someone in the neighborhood of 6, 7 million of us are doing really, really well, the equivalent of affluent and maybe even elite white folk, that therefore that's progress, that therefore we're supposed to be happy about this when those elite are leaving the rest of African America further and further behind. We're supposed to be happy about all of these sorts of things. I'm supposed to feel great that because someone in an elite position did the right thing in this one case, that they're somehow fighting for me on a personal level, or for the race, so to speak, as part of racial uplifting as we climb, and so on and so forth. Am I really supposed to feel like that? Feel all great and warm and gooey about these sorts of things? I don't think so. I don't think most of us should, right? I'm not arguing that there hasn't been any progress made. Of course, there's been progress made, but I don't think any. I think we've all noticed over the past, say, 30 or 40 or 50 years how much that progress has been eroded by not enforcing the Civil Rights Act of 1964 through the EEOC on a consistent basis, Clarence Thomas, or Supreme Court decisions that have gotten rid of affirmative action, which was basically an on-ramp for mostly middle-class black folk and a lot of first-generation black folk to make it either to the black elite or the black middle class, depending on where they started when they got into college in the first place, right? So these handfuls of people who get into elite public and private institutions, who somehow make it into the elite, or somehow make it into, go from being on welfare poor to being solidly or middle class or borderline affluent. That's what we're talking about here. Handfuls of people, thousands of people who've benefited, whereas millions of people, millions of African Americans, the best, that's, whatever their aspirations, that's not where they end up. They don't end up at Harvard or Yale or UC Berkeley or, or even Carnegie Mellon, like yours truly, for a PhD. That doesn't happen. So, um, these things are being eroded and have been, they've been eaten away at by neocons and neoliberals going back to the end of the LBJ administration, the end of the war on poverty and the Great Society programs in 1968 and 69, the dismantling of them under Nixon, and later Ford and even Carter. Yes, Jimmy Carter. If he's dead, if he dies by the time this is posted, may he rest in peace. If not, I still want him to rest in peace. I think he's a great person. I think he's done great things with his life. But his presidency is just the link in the chain, the continuum of neoliberal, neoconservative policies that have gradually eroded the gains of the civil rights era. And if that is the case, and that is the case, all the evidence points to, in terms of wealth gaps, in terms of educational attainment, even though education attainment's increased, the ability to go to college and afford college, to buy a home, to generate wealth, to start a business, to take care of your health, to deal with stress, mental health, all of those other things, shows a lack of progress and actually an erosion of progress. And this progress pretty much peaked somewhere in the neighborhood of between 1975 and 1982, depending on what the topic happens to be. Pretty much peaked in that way. So, for the 10 to 16% of African Americans who are doing really, really well, that's great. I'm glad you can celebrate Marshall Washington as a historical turning point that we should never, ever forget. And to some extent, we shouldn't forget. But you know, you even for them, for the folks who are elite, you spend so much time concentrating on the last parts of King's speech, just like Republicans do, just like Republicans have twisted those words, just like neocons and far right people, and even well-meaning white moderates, otherwise known as libtards, and far right circles of liberals, far right circles. You know, those folks have a tendency to just concentrate those last words. 95% of King's 20-minute speech is about the grievances African Americans have toward the United States when it comes to equality, socioeconomic equality, educational attainment, political equality, the violence of Jim Crow, and so on and so forth. Right? The masses, the vast majority of us, right? And while 1/6 of all African Americans are probably doing really, really well, the rest of us are either treading water, making a little bit of progress here and there, or drowning actually, and trying to grab life vest and those those conical things that you put over your head in order to keep yourself from drowning. And King was speaking to those people about the very fact that it had been 100 years since Gettysburg. It had been nearly 100 years since the 13th Amendment was passed by Congress and ratified by the states in 1865, and yet most of us back then found ourselves in poverty. 51% of African Americans found themselves in poverty. More than half of African Americans found themselves in some sort of dilapidated situation regarding their housing, or regarding schooling, or regarding the kind of work options and opportunities that they had, and so on and so forth. And so, while there's been some progress made on all of those fronts, there ain't enough progress to really be going around beating your chest about we've made a lot of progress, we've got a long, long way to go. That, in fact, is BS. It's, excuse my French, it's complete and utter bullshit. And because it is, it just seems to me that the black elite, what we can call the black elite these days, seems to be more in tune and more in line with the neoliberal and even neoconservative politics that has sprung up over the last 55 or so years, than it is with anything else. And so, and that's not to say that there aren't people in the black elite who are trying to, do racial uplift, to do lifting as we want, that aren't concerned with the lack of overall progress. They can look at the numbers and honestly say that progress is hardly enough for the average black folk, right? I'm sure there are, but there's way, way too many more people out there who really are in this, have fully assimilated American ideals around individualism, around entrepreneurship, around the idea that they work really, really, really hard, and therefore, since they work really hard on this one little thing, no one can question their commitment to equality or anything else. You're part of the elite. You're in elite circles all the time. You hang out and go to elite parties. You go to elite events. You pay to do Jack and Jill. You send your kids to parochial and private school. You put away 529s and other money necessary so that your kids can go for free to Cornell or to Yale or to Harvard or to University of Pennsylvania, right? Those kinds of things. Or, even if you are committed to HBCUs, send them to a Morehouse or a Spelman, not an Alcorn State, right? Not a Jackson State necessarily either, right? You're not sending your kids there. And so you have to sort of question that commitment, especially when you combine the issue of respectability politics and what people consider respectable, not respectable among the black elite. And this is stuff I've written about in other spaces. I've written about this in Medium. I've written about this in Al Jazeera. I've written about this to some extent in the Atlantic when I wrote about my own predicament in going to college 7 years ago. 7 years ago this weekend, as a matter of fact. So, the truth of the matter is, I have seen the black elite in operation, you know, far longer than I care to mention. There are too many examples for me to go through to talk about black elitism, right? And and while I am concentrating right now on colorism and exoticism and how that um, messes with the notion of blackness, because obviously, if you're embracing exoticism, colorism, you're also embracing aspects of whiteness. And because you're embracing aspects of whiteness, you also are sort of shunning folks who aren't just black, quote unquote, just black folk, the kinds of folk that, like me, who are like, well, my mom grew up in a sharecropping family. My dad was a part of a farming family and did some migrant farm work before he moved up to New York in the 1960s, that kind of thing, right? Ordinary folk, who lived in the South and moved up into, during the third wave of migration after World War II and before roughly the early 1970s, right? That group. And so, that's relatively ordinary compared to my dad's white, my mom's white, I'm part Cuban, I'm black plus is what I've put it in one of the Substacks I'm going to post this week. Black plus, right? Black and, right? And while I don't have there's nothing wrong with, we're all mixed in some way, shape, or form. If you really want to stretch back, say, I'll pick arbitrarily 6 generations, back to toward the end of slavery, or the generation before slavery ends, all of us are ultimately mixed with somebody of white ancestry. In some cases, some folks of um, indigenous ancestry too. So that's not the issue. The issue is, what do you do with that? Does that mean that you are special, that you are exotic, that you are different simply because that you have unique problems simply because you have more than one immediate heritage, that you aren't just black? And my answer to that is, blackness is all encompassing. It can encompass all of those variations. You can be unique and yet black at the same time. And being, in fact, black does not mean that you just only have black ancestry. It means that you have a combination of experiences, culture, sense of the world, sense of life, sense of yourself that transcends actually these little variations that recur, phenotypical variations that occur because you might have a white parent somewhere around the line, or even if you are black, ordinarily black, or whether American black or African black, but are raised, through transracial adoption by white parents, you are still, you're still black. That's how I look at it. I think that's how anyone who's a Pan-Africanist actually looks at this sort of thing. But it actually points to the things I'm talking about regarding this week too, because part of the problem with the black elite is the fact that it does absorb these ideals around respectability, around, ordinary people who wear baggy pants, or, wear their hair a certain way, or won't, conform to what America says they should conform to, don't deserve to have equality, don't deserve to have a lifestyle that isn't impoverished, that isn't living in a neighborhood that has to deal with environmental racism and dilapidated housing and the expenses that come with being over policed in communities that have a lot of people living with poverty, or living with working poverty, especially these days, since most people are working, right? Those kinds of things. And so, the real sense is that, the black elite has kind of abandoned all of these folks in exchange for the fact that they are living this toxic American dream in a way that allows them to, enjoy, really ignore what's going on with most black folks, whether they're middle class or not. And so, part of that is colorism, part of that is exoticism, since so many of those folks also happen to be biracial, happen to be of mixed race, happen to be, folks who grew up through transracial adoption, those kinds of things. And I think that proximity to whiteness is just one aspect. It's not the only aspect, but it's one aspect of how, the black elite leaves folks. Well, after all, because you can be biracial and poor, and being poor and biracial gives you no advantage by itself, right? It's really the fact that you have this socioeconomic experience that allows you to basically not feel any pain, not feel the pinch of life that most folks in this country have to go through, despite the fact that this country is the richest country on the planet. And so that's just my 2 cents for the week. So anyway, I will post also around these kinds of issues forthwith and continue rolling. So happy Labor Day weekend.